Here we are, a little off center. We need to be a little more toward this side of things, right? Would that solve my issue? Would that solve my problem? Would that make things on center? Still not good enough, you say? Still, maybe I should move over. Maybe I should move over to this side. Now we're centered, you say? Ah, beautiful. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm so glad you could join me. It's a wonderful morning here. Yeah, the sleep has been a little off. We'll say it's been different. We've been sleeping differently. And change is always good, right? Because you can't keep doing the same old thing. You can't keep doing the same old monotonous day in, day out. You got to change it up. So sometimes you just need to sleep differently. That's always good, right? Change is always good. So I was thinking about obligation and consequence. I was thinking about anonymity. I was thinking about children and lineage. I was thinking about fetishization. I was thinking about peras. I was thinking about limiting. I was thinking about the way in which a personality is a limit. A personality is what you can be. You are that personality, and there has to be some kind of reconciliation or internal consistency that you are the same person day in, day out, that, you expect that when you watch my video, it's going to have some kind of continuity or resemblance to the last video I made. That is the assumption, right? That is what it means to have a personality. That's what it means to have personhood, to be a person, is to have this kind of continuity, right? That continuity is a rule, and you can't just go off and do whatever you want to do. You have to remain continuous. You have to remain in the vein of yourself. And you can't do otherwise. You can't just wake up suddenly someday and decide to change everything. I suppose you can say that you're going to do that, but on some level there has to be an evolution. There has to be a progress, a progression. But anonymity and acting breaks this up. It breaks it up, and it allows people to bend the rules of personality, and they don't need to be a person anymore. They can be an anonymous commenter, an anonymous participant in society. Of course, this is first introduced by urbanism, the concept of the stranger. Previously, a stranger would be someone who was not of your tribe, someone you were seeing for the first time, the contact of two entities, something from outside. But then the concept of the stranger went from being on the periphery and being on the outside to being at the core. The stranger of urbanism, the stranger of what we might say is our current government. Our government's ruled by strangers. Who are the people who are actually in power? Well, they're strangers. We don't know who they are. We know Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not in power. Donald Trump is playing a role. But we know that at the end of the day, the right wing knows this, and I think the left wing pretends not to know this. But they still do, because they'll say things like, Donald Trump, he has gone against the government. Donald Trump is a traitor. Donald Trump has been disloyal to the intelligence community. Donald Trump is disloyal to the interests of the United States. Donald Trump is a rogue agent. Donald Trump is anti-government. I mean, these are all legitimate points, right? So who is Donald Trump then? Well, he's clearly not the government. If he's anti-government, if he's anti-system, if he's anti-political correctness, then there has to be something which is politically correct. And correct relates to what is the dominant morality, the correct morality, the orthodoxy. So who actually rules and creates this orthodoxy? Who organizes this orthodoxy? Well, I don't know. You can point to one person or another, and they end up just being a manager of this whole thing. They end up being someone who has received the orthodoxy, who is pushing it onward, but they did not originate it. And they do not ultimately organize its maintenance. They are playing a part in its maintenance, but they're not at the top. So who is at the top? What is the government actually made of? If it's not made of Donald Trump, if he is not the sovereign, who is the sovereign? Well, the sovereign is a stranger. The sovereign is anonymous. We don't know who the sovereign is. We don't know. We could guess. We could say, well, it's rich people. Well, maybe it is. Maybe you just rank the richest people and you say, well, that's the government. And whatever share of wealth they have is the share of power that they have in this, what would we call it, a kleptocracy? What would we call it, an oligarchy? A rule by money, a rule by finance. So that is one way to do it. Of course, there is a question, and I do need to plug this in. Unfortunately, I didn't foresee the low battery remaining thing, so we're gonna take this out without restarting the video because that would be a waste of my time. Okay. So we do want to keep a consistent sound though, right? I hope this is charging. You better charge. We want to keep a consistent sound. We don't know how to do that. That's quite impossible. Just hold it. Just hold it. It's not a consistent sound. Oh well. We're having a wonderful jamming time out here. It's just a beautiful day. Beautiful morning. So we could say that all this money that we talk about, riches, billionaires, maybe that's all a show. Maybe that's all fabricated. Maybe there's a layer behind that where, we see the Forbes richest, who are the richest people in the world. Well, maybe that's just a front. Maybe that's just a group that is put up to be the richest people, who we pretend are the richest people, but in all reality, they're not. And we don't know who the richest people are because they hide themselves. They are strangers. So there is no accountability. There are no consequences. And this is how it is arranged from the top down. And how do we fit into this system? Well, we are childless and anonymous. And childless means we don't have a responsibility to our future name. We don't have to give someone a name, the given name and the family name. We don't have to worry about the consequences. We don't have to look children in the eye and say, I tried my best, or this is what I'm giving you, or you deserve this. Those are very difficult things to say, no matter how hard you try. It's very difficult to, tell someone as a child or having grown up as an adult to say to them, I did my best. And that's very difficult to do because there's so many things I think that most people would admit that, maybe we don't do our best. And maybe we do neglect future generations. And maybe Greta Thunberg has a point. We might not agree with Greta Thunberg. We might not like Greta Thunberg, whatever. My apologies for the thump. But that's just to accentuate the point that the Greta Thunberg movement is tapping into an energy, a concern about the future, and why does this energy exist? I think it exists because we understand and we know and we feel that we have been neglectful. And because we know and we feel that we have been neglectful, we have all of this guilt. And this guilt seeks to exercise itself in one way or another. Now, it could go down the hard path of actually understanding, why do we feel guilty? Why do we feel neglectful? Is it because we have not provided structure for future generations? Is it because we have left them in a state of limbo? Is it because we have abandoned them? Is it because we have given them over to wolves? Is it because we have told them you can do whatever you want to do, and what they want to do has been programmed into them by malignant forces? Right? So these are all difficult questions. It's easier to just say, the environment, the environment. And so they take all of that anxious, guilty energy, saying, we're going to destroy the planet and we have to save the children. Yes, we do have to save the children. Indeed, that is important. And we all understand that on some deep pre-cognitive level, like a pre-rational level, before we're even making arguments and looking at CO2. Before we're doing that, we are understanding that we are guilty and we have done something wrong. And so environmentalism comes and says, it's, you know what we did wrong? We pumped CO2 into the atmosphere. That was our grand sin. And so it is a kind of scapegoating. I don't think it is a scapegoating of resentment, as, I don't know, I guess somehow there's that term, scapegoating. What is it? Adam Katz has a theory about scapegoating and resentment. But I don't think this is scapegoating resentment. I think this is scapegoating guilt. I think people feel guilty. And it's very interesting, I guess, the concept of scapegoating resentment. Maybe you could turn this into some kind of resentful thing by saying, people resent the fact that their children's futures have been stolen, and so they support, or the children themselves resent the fact that they have been forsaken. And so that's where this energy comes from. So you could say maybe there's some resentful stuff in there, but I think there is an element of guilt that people feel, and so they scapegoat CO2 as the great sin, because CO2 is easier to deal with, it's cleaner to deal with, it's simpler, it's a chemical. Got to get that chemical out of the air. We got to shut down technology or something. Regulation. And that is presented as a challenge, and so people are running around in circles and holding protests and killing themselves, committing terrorist acts in order to protect the environment for the sake of the children. But is that really what the children need at this moment? Would you... It's an interesting question. You can take millions of children who have to move because their houses are underwater, or you can all have all kinds of problems with children. What about the problem when the problem is internal and there's nowhere you can flee to, and there's no amount of resources that you can pump into the child? Climate change, you can say, people are going to have to move, and there's going to be a shortage of food, and there's going to be all these issues that come about as a result of climate change. It's like, those are all material problems that can be solved with material solutions. We can move people from A to B. We can, try to increase agricultural productivity to keep everyone well fed. These are material problems. And I think we like to think in material paradigms That's how we're trained. Everything is a material problem. Oh, you're depressed. Well, it's a chemical imbalance. You have a material problem. Oh, the world is ending. Well, what kind of material problem could that be? Well, maybe it's climate change. So everything, when all you have is materialism as a hammer, every nail looks like a material nail, right? You're never dealing with the psychological. You're never dealing with the sociological. You're never dealing with how people relate to one another. It has nothing to do with the climate. You might say climatological problems are a result of a lack of responsibility, because there are a lack of consequences for people in charge when they hurt the environment, because there is anonymity, because we're ruled by strangers. You can say all of that, and I think that makes sense. But I think you have to understand the primacy of psychology and sociology before this materiality of resources and CO2. It's an attitude problem that we have. It's a mindset. It's a behavioral problem. And it's a spiritual problem. It's an issue of will. In some cases, you could say lack thereof. In some cases, you could say it is a runaway will. I did want to talk about my understanding of personality, right? I wanted to talk about how not having kids is a kind of anonymity. In the same way that you can hop on 4chan, which I don't like. I'm being critical of anonymity here. I don't like 4chan. I don't like 4chan culture. I don't like that I was part of a generation and part of a niche within that generation and a subculture within that generation that stewed in this anonymous internet cauldron, because it dissolves your personality, and therefore it dissolves the peras that keeps you together, that gives you bounds and limits. And without bounds and limits in that Apollonian spirit, you dissolve into apathy and nihilism and suicide. And that is where so many of my cohort find themselves. And I find myself affected by that. And it does not at this point give me a sense of nostalgia, as some other people have, and I've maybe felt before of, here's some old internet thing. Something reminds you of your childhood. We always want to look back fondly on our childhood. But at this point, something like 4chan or something like Reddit, and these different websites, these anonymous websites, the culture is bad. It's toxic. It is a culture of permissiveness. It is a culture of openness. It is a culture without limits, without rules, where the abnormal is accepted, where the aberrant is encouraged. It's laughed at. It's funny. And that makes me sound like a prude, right? That makes me sound like a conservative. That makes me sound like someone who wants to hide the truth. And I guess I'm at the point where I think that specifically when we're talking about all of these things, we have to understand them in a developmental context. And by that, what I mean is, when you have a child who is exposed to certain aspects of life, it's going to affect a child very differently. It's going to affect their development. It's going to affect their adult life differently than if you have a childhood free of those maybe traumatic things. And trauma, I'm using that in a very general way just to mean that which is shocking, that which is out of the ordinary, that which is out of line with the delineations of sociality. Violence is a kind of trauma, right? because violence is about breaking bonds and damaging, and these are things which can affect children in a different way than how they affect adults. If you're, exposed to screaming people, well, as an adult, you might say, well, that's annoying, or I want to get away from these people. If you grow up in that kind of environment where you don't have a choice, or you don't understand the alternative. When you're brought up with a good environment, and it serves you, and it helps you, and it structures you, and it builds you up, it's constructive. It's not destructive, it's constructive. Construction always means peras. Construction, we have this concept of construction that is this creative explosion of, breaking bounds and doing things differently. So you're coloring outside the lines. That's what it means to be creative. But that's the opposite of creativity. Creativity is about taking things to their logical conclusion, meaning staying within the bounds of something and pursuing it in an almost obsessive way. You take the idea, what would the perfect woman or the perfect man look like? What would the perfect natural scene, the perfect mountain? These are questions that the artist tries to answer. And so in trying to answer these questions, the artist creates art. And that's creativity. Creativity is not coloring outside the lines. Creativity is not, if I make a video and I ramble on and on as I do about nothing, that's not creative. That's word salad. That is unstructured, amorphous. You can't attack what I'm saying because I'm just, I'm making self-contradictory points and I'm just throwing things out there. That's not creative. Creativity is pyramidal. Creativity has a base and a foundation, and it builds up and builds up and builds up. And you create a structure for yourself, you create rules, and you satisfy the conditions of those rules. There's something creative about the athletic process where you have rules to the game, and you can't break those rules. And because you can't break those rules, you have to become incredible in order to win at that game. Take soccer, you can't use your hands. So you have to do some fancy footwork. Well, let's say some creative genius, self-proclaimed, comes along. He picks up the ball, and he starts treating the game like a game of rugby. Well, all of a sudden, he has this unfair advantage, and then the game devolves into a kind of a rugby or football or something like that. Then it's a different game. But those games themselves have certain rules. You can't whip out a gun and start shooting the other players. So because there are rules that constrain what you're able to do, excellence is the outcome. Excellence is what is produced when people are put under rules and pressures. And that's where creativity comes from. Creativity is the child of necessity. Necessity, which is peras, which is deprivation, which is ordering, which is cutting away. That's where excellence and creativity comes from, not from this lackadaisical laziness, just do whatever you want. You wake up in the morning, you have nothing to do. You have no goal. Maybe you have external goals, financial goals, work, job, school. Maybe you have these kind of goals. And maybe you have social goals. You're trying to rise up in some kind of social context. But people, when you look at the state of the economy, it seems to be dissolving. It seems to be melting in a way for a lot of people. And when you look at that's, you have Andrew, we'll just give people free money. That concept is so alien to us. It's so foreign to us. And the economy, literally, jobs just seem to be vanishing. They just seem to be dissolving. And then you look at the social sphere, and sociality seems to be dissolving. The churches are just emptying out, getting old, shutting down. As John David Ebert has mentioned, the malls have become ghost towns in a way. Nobody wants to go out. More and more I see advertisements and commercials for, hey, was it DoorDash or Bite Squad? We get your dinner so you don't have to talk to other people. We deliver your dinner. We'll ring your doorbell. You pay with the app, so you don't even have to touch dirty dollar bills and hand them over to your dirty DoorDash Bite Squad car driver. You don't have to touch their hands or shake their hands or make eye contact or open the door. All you do is you pay them. They show up, knock on the door, leave the box of pizza on the doorstep. Maybe that's not how it happens, but, we're getting to this point, right? Deliver my groceries, Amazon delivery, drone delivery. Deliver it, knock on the door, leave the package. Oh, my package is here. Oh, my package. And more, the things that people are buying and consuming are not even real material products and goods. There's some kind of immaterial, people are buying like a Fortnite skin. They want to change the appearance of their Fortnite character. How people are spending money on that? What is going on? Can we explain this? Can we understand this? If we do not have a general scheme that just says, everything is sort of dissolving in terms of sociality and connections between people and reasons that people have to interact, and the ways in which people are interacting is less and less connected, less and less peras, less and less rule-bound, less and less within some kind of context, or, the concept of manners, the concept of etiquette is really breaking down in a lot of ways. And it's producing this alienation. People don't know how to interact. People are anxious. It's interesting. People complain about, I have social anxiety. I can't deal with people. Well, maybe some of it might be because they don't like dealing with strangers and whatever. Maybe it's a chemical imbalance. I don't know. It could be all kinds of explanations. But maybe, just maybe, it has something to do with the fact that there are no social rules anymore. People don't know what to expect out of each other. There is no norm. Normal is thrown out the window. You can't be normal. To be normal, what does that even mean? What does it even mean to be more normal? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute. It's very topsy-turvy. So when you're looking at this situation, you're like, well, what is normal? Should I give them a handshake? Should I give them a hug? Should I make eye contact? Should I be aggressive? Should I be passive? I think a lot of people have this passive tendency to just let things happen around them, to be a voyeur. I think that is part of our psychological training. We are trained to be voyeurs, to not interact, to not disrupt. There is something going on. Oh, well, that does not concern me. There's a fight going on, parents and children, and they're screaming, and oh boy, I better duck my head down, look at my shoes, and shuffle away, and do so as quietly as possible, so as not to alert people. We're like gazelles or something. We're these prey animals, and the predatory instinct or the interventionist instinct, the assertive, aggressive instinct that you'd have, if you care, give an example. If your children are caught up in some kind of an issue or some kind of a problem, the correct, right, and proper instinctual response is, you stand up and you do something about it. You intercept, you intervene, you interact. You don't just sit and watch and, oh, well, that's his problem. No, that's your son. Or that's your daughter. You don't just sit and watch. So this is part of the mentality of a childless society, is that we're becoming more passive because we're less invested, because we don't care what happens to everybody else, because we're not injecting, maybe that's not the best word, but we're not throwing kids out into the society, so we don't care if the society goes to hell. The people MGTOW, or people want to drop out, people who don't care, people who are apathetic, like aggressively apathetic. And I've played into this. Hey, I don't have kids. So there you go. It's a self-analysis. That just wraps the whole thing up, doesn't it? But the point I was trying to make is that, just having, and it's not just having children, okay? That's something that anybody, well, most people, if you're not sterile, most people can have kids. It's a choice you can make. But again, going back to the developmental side of it, so common was it in prior times for people to have siblings that most often siblings would help raise their younger siblings. Does anyone remember that? Does anyone remember those days? People from large families understand that. And so it trains you to have a mentality of being others-focused, caring about others, being involved with others, not being apathetic, having to take care of them, to look after them, to create rules for them. So you create a mentality of responsibility when you have siblings. So it starts in childhood, and it's not your choice. A child can't really ask his parents for siblings, and if he does, maybe he'll be laughed at. One is enough. Ha, 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 ha. One is enough. Ha, 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 ha. We can't even keep our marriage together, and you want us to throw another kid in the mix? Ha, 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 ha. Yeah, we don't feel secure enough to do that. So it's not, part of this is to say it's not your fault. Children of a childless society. And as I'm saying this, people can bicker and say, well, I came from a big family and I came from a small family, and the stereotypes that you're making here about responsibility and well, that doesn't fit my particular situation. What I'm trying to make here is sort of a threshold sociological theory. In the same way that if you have a class full of white kids and you have one black kid in the class, well, the one black kid is not going to start a gang all on his own, especially if it's like one black girl in the class full of white kids. She's not going to go and start burning cop cars all by herself. When we talk about, in sociology, we talk about thresholds. When we're talking about these social behaviors, we're talking about thresholds where if you're surrounded by certain people of a certain type because of causes, and there's a kind of a threshold. There are these thresholds. There is this explosive impact. There is this exponential impact. There is kind of a hive impact that if you live in a society and you don't have siblings, but everyone else does, well, you're going to kind of think like everybody else. You're going to mimic their behavior and their thought process. If, on the other hand, you come from a big family, but everyone around you in the society at large is to a great degree childless or single child, only child, then you're going to start to adapt that kind of thinking, that kind of culture that is produced. So we can look at that, in terms of ethnic cultures. And we can also look at it, the impact of fertility, family size, family structure has on people's conceptions of things such as politics. I mean, we know that when women get married and have kids, white women become more conservative. They become more conservative, and this is just a basic point. So I think the viewers, y'all out there, ye know what's going on. You know what's up. You've heard this before. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just reinforcing your preconceived notions. I am introducing confirmation bias. I am I am confirming your biases. So that is what we are doing. We're talking about the dissolution of society because of a lack of children and the introduction of anonymity. And so, my message to people would be get off anonymous platforms and stop engaging with things anonymously. Now, some people will tell me, I can't do that because I have a super important job, and my job requires that I be a card-carrying Democrat. And if they hear that I, they hear, let's go extreme with it. If they hear that I prefer Tulsi to Hillary, I'll be fired and I'll lose this and that. Okay, well, don't be synonymous, be pseudonymous. That's not a word. Pseudonymous. Pseudonymous. Pseudonym. Pseudonym. Anonym. Anonymous. Pseudonymous. I don't know. I'd have to see the word. I'm writing it with my fingers. Pseudonymous. Whatever, dude. You know what I mean. Be like Mr. Cool Mug. Mr. Cool Mug, he might be anonymous. He's got to protect his super important job or whatever he has going on. But you know who he is. And ultimately, that means he kind of has to stand behind what he says, right? So it's not there is certainly an anonymity. I don't know what his face looks like. I don't know what his voice sounds like. I don't know where he lives. I'm not part of his community. There are all these contingencies where, let's say, Mr. Cool Mug and I were stuck on a desert island together. We would probably interact a little bit differently, right? I think we can all say that. I think if we were all stuck together on a desert island, I think we could all say that we'd act a little bit differently. Maybe tensions would rise and, you'd get some struggles and you'd have some anger and frustration. And you might see a lot of that. You might see some violence break out. You might see some people getting violent with it. Certainly, you've got those types. You've got people who these disagreements come out and they just start getting violent. And they just start killing people on a desert island. I think this is what Lord of the Flies is all about, right? Kids put on an island, start killing each other, something like that. Didn't read the book. It's a book. Didn't read. That's my motto. It's a book. What do you mean, did I read it? Well, it's a book. I don't read books. Duh. Yeah, like I said, I think the last time I read a book from start to finish, actually just read the book, that was something other than a book about Trump. I read that book, but, for a couple of years now, I haven't read any books. Don't know any books. That's where we're at with the books. What a word, book. I mean, why is it not book? Come on, English language. Come on. Why aren't they books? Them books. It's getting silly. The spelling, I understand that we want to keep the spelling the same as Shakespeare so we can read Shakespeare. But come on now. Something, I don't know. Either we got to change how we say it or change how we spell it at some point. The spelling reform. That's going to be the next big thing. Spelling reform. But yeah, we're talking about dissolution. We're talking about anonymity. I say get away from it. I say it is you are dissolving yourself. And anonymity is you're killing yourself. You are taking away the peras. You are taking away the accountability. You're taking away the responsibility and the consequences. The more that we can be held accountable for our actions, we understand that. Have I not talked about this 1,000 times? The Ring of Gyges, the Greek myth of the Ring of Gyges. You put the Ring of Gyges on, you become invisible, and all of a sudden, You get good little boys, as I guess that maybe the Joker would say. You get good little boys committing crimes, killing, thieving, right? We know Zeus, he can transmute himself into different forms. And we know he does a lot of kind of weird stuff. Transforms into a swan. Starts getting it on with mortal women. Hera doesn't like that. It's not good, but the message there is this transmutation allows for a breaking of bonds. So being anonymous frankly, being anonymous allows a lot of weak people to masquerade as like hard skinhead, gang types, where they're ready for war. And it allows old boomers, it allows fat, lazy, old boomers to pretend like, yeah, we're warriors. It allows young, messed up, confused kids to say, yeah, we're ready for war. Yeah, come at us. Yeah, the anonymity, it's bad, and I say it from experience. You get trapped in an online internet persona, some kind of anonymous situation, some kind of anonymous culture, and you're swept up in it, and, you justify falsifications. What you're saying isn't true, or it's not consistent with the real you in one way or another. You're LARPing is the term that's thrown around, but you just keep going with it because you're like, well, we'll just keep LARPing until something happens, or I'm sure the rest of the guys have their stuff together. It's like, no. Nobody has their stuff together. You're all in this. You're all equally pretending. Nothing is authentic as long as it is anonymous. I guess I'm putting hard and fast. Again, I do this. People don't like it. Then I complain about how people complain. And then people make fun of me. They bully me. Did you know this? They make fun of it. I actually think it's... I like... Sometimes when it gets to the point, someone can make a joke at my expense, and it's like, you know what, that's true. You know what, it is a little bit ridiculous. So all of that being foretold, what I'll say here is I'm making kind of generalizations, but the spectrum of behavior I'm trying to describe is that as you increase anonymity, you decrease responsibility. Excuse me, that was a wild yawn. So as you increase anonymity, you decrease your responsibility, you decrease rules, you decrease creativity, you decrease constructive action, you increase, therefore, disillusion, you increase destructive action, you increase fetishes over... the real thing. We can all... is sex a fetish? I guess by some extreme celibate definition, sex is a fetish. But I think we can all have, like, a reasonable definition of sex where it's like, no, sex is not a fetish. Or, like, the heterosexual male does not have a fetish for women. No, he's attracted to women. He loves women. And he likes sex. And same for the woman. The woman, it loves the men... and she loves sex, and that is not a fetish. That is like the thing in itself. That is the thing in itself that we're biologically programmed to want, because that lust was not lust in itself. It was connected to love, because you have sex. Well, romance accompanies that, and you know what else accompanies that is children. And all of a sudden now you're parents and you have children in common. And that engenders feelings of love. And so there's this whole love-lust cycle that goes on. The two are not mutually exclusive. The two are not necessarily opposed to one another. But because of disassociations of technology, things like birth control, we are able to disassociate love from lust And so as a result, you have people going, again, displacing the feeling of love that they would have for their children. They're then putting that, taking that, and they're fetishizing, not sexually, but there is a kind of motherly fetishization of the refugee, of the poor, of the oppressed, that goes on in the same way that a man with no GF might fetishize pornography. A woman with no children fetishizes refugees. Do you see what I'm saying here? We don't have the real thing, and so we have to worship these fake things. And so when Judaism says things like, do not worship idols, you should worship the true God, the one God, the only God, you know, there is something to that. I think that we should take seriously this idea that there are sort of genuine things in themselves. And I guess people can disagree. Oh, well, I'm an antinatalist, and therefore sex is stupid. And I mean, we can go down that whole rabbit hole. But I guess I would just say is that there are real things that we want and need. We want and need community. We want and need edification. We want and need love. We want and need comrades and friends and loved ones and people we would be willing to live for and to die for. We need dedication. We need loyalty. We need honesty. We need trust. We need trust. We need security. Not security, material security. We have plenty of that. We don't need any more of that. In fact, I think I'd be willing to sacrifice a little material security in order to get some emotional security. Not the security of, oh, I know there's going to be bread on my table tomorrow, so I'm all good. No, if someone told me, okay, you know what, from now on, one day you might have enough to eat and the next day you might go hungry. But they said, yeah, that's going to be the situation, but also you're going to have lots of friends and family and loved ones and people you can rely on, people you can trust, versus a situation where people ghost. You have ghosting culture. People ghost each other. People create online relationships. Entire communities ghost. You have an entire internet community and the whole thing just ghosts itself. Thing collapses because it was a specter. It was an apparition. It wasn't real. And I do remember being young and being part of internet communities and saying, oh, I wish this could be real life. I wish we could just live together and just go on fun quests and do all the things we do online, but do them in real life. Well, there is such a game. It's called real life. It's called real life. But, I said that, and I said, okay, well, I'm ready to quit these games and start engaging with real life. And then I found that real life was filled with so much fakeness and was filled with so much urbanism and filled with so much anonymity. When you have people moving around for economic reasons, when you have, the whole concept of college, that you leave your community and you go off to college, and then you have a job and you go off somewhere else. This whole concept is a concept in line with the forces of urbanism and anonymity. And so the problems that I felt on the internet are also present in the quote-unquote real world to one extent or another. Maybe they're not as bad. Maybe it is better to change jobs and change locations every 5 years rather than just live your life on the internet. That's probably true. But there is so much malignant behavior that we engage with because the anonymous urbanism grants us a kind of a advancement on the spectrum of the ring of Gyges of anonymity and urbanism. So that's where we're at, and the only way to solve this is to have a stake. You have to have ownership. You have to put your resources into something that is communal, that is like that is real. And so, when I have discussions with people online and they talk about buying some land, I genuinely do not like the things I hear about plastics and xenoestrogens. I don't like the idea that plastics are causing cancers. I don't like the idea that they are introducing hormonal changes or reactions or changing the developmental process of children such that it's making puberty faster. It is making people more polymorphous in their sexuality. They are less restricted. They're less conventional, and they're more fetishistic and paraphilic. I don't like a lot of the things I hear about plastic. And so you could make all kinds of arguments about why we need to go live in the woods to get away from these xenoestrogens and pollutants that are part of everyday modern technological society. You could make that kind of argument. So there's all kinds of arguments you can make to say that, permaculture and living in the land and living out in the wild, that is just the better way to be. It is healthier biochemically. It is healthier psychologically. Being in the sun, being with nature, being with the animals, the seasons, the earth, the soil. Maybe there's something spiritual, the anima mundi. There could be all kinds of justifications that we could give for going out and living in the woods. And that's all fine and good, and I'm not even opposed to that. And I kind of like that. It's kind of romantic to me. But at the end of the day, when I think one of the most crucial things that people often miss in these kind of dialogues and discussions, and maybe you can call them fantasies or plans, depending on your level of cynicism. But you talk about this sort of thing, and one of the things people don't really think about is the level of investment. It's like you own a chunk of the land, like you're tied to the land. You can't just leave it, and you can't just sell it, and you can't just up and just disconnect. No, you're stuck. You are stuck for the first time in your life. You can't run away. You can't hide under the bed or in the closet or lock yourself in the bathroom. You cannot run away. You have to confront this situation for good or for bad. You are stuck. It's like a marriage. You're stuck with these people in this place from now until death do you part. That is a huge game changer psychologically and morally. You will act differently when you are invested in a community, when you have a stake in that community, and when it is not. Again, we look at Henry VIII and the economic transformation that he made when he dissolved the Catholic ownership of land of the Roman Catholic Church. He dissolved the ownership of that land and he sold it to the merchant class. And so he aided the process of dissolution, because no longer was to be a landowner had nothing to do with your heroism in battle, had nothing to do with your honor, had nothing to do with your family lineage. You were no longer bred for greatness and all of these aristocratic virtues, noblesse oblige. This whole hierarchical system was put under the pressure of dissolution. And now it was just, I have this land and I guess I'll sell it and get something else. And this is how, the modern world was created. So to step back from that and to say, let's have a stake in things. Let's have a stake. Let's make a YouTube channel. And that is a stake. That is a kind of a stake. It is a virtual stake. It is not a piece of land. But let's make a YouTube channel. Let's make a community. Let's make a commitment. Let us do things that tie us down, that are kind of rules, because by having rules in our life, we breed excellence. By removing rules, removing pressures, just doing whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, that breeds laziness, that breeds weakness, that breeds anxiety and neuroticism and guilt, because you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're not living how you're supposed to. You are not unleashing and developing your potential. You are languishing. You are wasting your life. You only have one life to live. This whole idea, I always go back to it. the idea of, oh, well, when you're 80 years old, no 80-year-old says, I wish I only worked one more day in the factory. I wish I could have just spent 8 more hours in the factory. Well, no 80-year-old's going to say that, so you should come out drinking with us and create some good memories, man. You should relax a little bit. You should just have fun. Come on, man. You only live once, right? Let's go make some memories. There's an alternative perspective, which is that at the end of your life, you're going to look at all of the hedonism that you engaged with, and you're going to realize when I die, that hedonism dissipates. It goes nowhere. And perhaps when I reincarnate into a world of hedonists. And if you have been brought up by a single mother who uses drugs liberally and who sleeps with men liberally, and, those men are not very nice to you, and all of these things, then we understand that being raised into a society or a world created by hedonism and hedonists is not very fun. In fact, it could be described as a living hell. So if you are a hedonist in this life, who knows? If we take like the idea of solipsism seriously, the idea of solipsism is like the universe is just a phantasm. It's a creation of your own little imagination. Nothing really exists. Well, if that is the case, let's take that seriously for a moment. If that is the case, then, when you die, well, you don't really die because you are the universe. You can't really die. And you remake the universe in a new vision. The way that you act, the choices that you make are going to impact this next universe that you put yourself in. Now, I don't think a completely solipsistic analysis is really all that good, and I don't really follow it, but it is an example of the kind of argument or the kind of metaphor that I'm trying to make here of the situation. So we have hedonism, we have work ethic. And at the end of the day, very few people are going to say, well, I wish I had one more hedonistic experience. A lot of people are going to say, I wish I had accomplished something. I wish I had a stake in something. I wish I was somebody. I wish I had a lineage. I wish I had a heritage. I wish I was leaving people behind. I think a lot of the people who leave this world in a most blissful state, in the most satisfied and content state, are those people who say, well, I have grandchildren, and I'm happy about that. And I think people who die alone with, drug-addled memories of parties and I think that's miserable. When everything depends on your, it takes a lot of youthful energy to party, and it takes youthful beauty to engage with hookup culture. And those things fade away and decline for a woman, they decline through your 20s, your 30s, by your 40s, you're pretty much done to a great extent. And for men, it might be a little bit later, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. And so by the time you get to your 60s, you have a few more decades of life where you're just sort of trapped in a body that can't do those things anymore. And if you've trained yourself and you've driven yourself to believe that that's what it's all about, then that's pretty miserable, versus you work hard and, you have a lineage that you'll leave after you. So there are a lot of different topics. We didn't get to all the topics. It was a video, right? We did our video, and that's what it's about. It's about whether or not we want to. We are disciplined. We are dedicated. We are adhering to rules. We are forming a community. We are building a community. We are dialoguing. We are putting a stake. Like, literally think about putting a stake in the ground. Just take that big old wooden pole, or maybe it's a metal pole. Maybe give it some size, give it some weight, a nice sharp stake, and you're just driving it with a hammer into the ground, and you put your little tassels on it or some decorative items. You say, this is my stake, this is my claim, this is my purchase, this is where I stand. rather than drifting as, our good old anime Neon Genesis Evangelion with the last few episodes, Shinji's floating in space. He says, I don't like it. I don't like floating in space. That is a very perceptive episode. That's a good episode. You should watch that episode because it explains our current condition. So don't give in to that condition. Don't embrace that condition. Don't be a part of that condition. Put your stake in the ground. Build a community. Get away from anonymity to the extent possible. Make steps in the right direction. At least do not give up. Do not give in. And thank you for listening. It's been a different sort of a Mr. Cool Mug podcast. If it has been, who can define such a thing? We should define, in the spirit of what I've been talking about, we should define the rules of a Mr. Cool Mug podcast and be stringent with it. I will just say this channel would be better if I scripted all of the videos, if I researched, or if I at least drew up notes. Maybe not entirely. That was a wild yawn. Maybe not entirely scripted, but like slightly scripted. Just like bullet points. Like, I want to talk about this, and this. So then I really, all of those things would be good. That would be good to do. It would be wonderful. There's a lot of room for improvement. We know how we can improve. We know what to do. But guys, I know it's hard when you are floating in space. The Newtonian model is an object in motion stays in motion. So you're just kind of floating in your space, and you're like, well, there's no way for me to get back on solid ground because there's no attractive or repulsing forces to get me to some kind of like planetary object where I can stand and again have some kind of gravity, have some kind of limit, some kind of defining principles to my life. Well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but maybe there are planetary objects and their gravity affects you, and you just have to sort of be receptive to that. There are these planets out there, and you have to understand your receptivity. That even as you claim to be apathetic, you might be quite passionate about your video games or whatever. I actually don't think you can replace passion with apathy entirely. I think people remain passionate in one way or another, but it is a kind of a false passion, a kind of substitute passion. So, there are different, video games are a form of peros. And maybe we've spoken out against video games, but they are still a form of peros. They're a form of rules. They're a form of driving toward excellence in the game. And maybe that is false. Maybe that is a waste of time. But still, it is seeking that principle. We never stop seeking that principle. That is our guiding light. That is what we are seeking. That is what we are after. And so we go down sort of all sort of paths and distractions and substitutions and smoke and mirrors and clones and doppelgangers. And we go through those illusions. But at the end of the day, we are seeking for order. We are seeking for this order. And that is what drives us. So if we recognize that authentically, then we can move away from the fake food and get some real nourishment. You step away from the fast food, step away from the candy, the artificial sweeteners, whatever they call it, stevia. Stop having that stevia and start eating some real food, and maybe not necessarily sugar. If you're going to have sugar, have some honey, have some dried dates, have some nice dried fruit, have some fruit, eat some blueberries, eat some grapes, eat some strawberries, have some of those nice fruits, dude. Eat some fruit. It's my recommendation. Eat real food, and in terms of your life, look at those things in your life where clearly there's a desire for greatness, and it's expressing itself in these simulacrum, in these simulations So recognize that desire and affirm that desire, but understand that that desire is not being fulfilled, and that potential is being wasted on falsehoods and distractions. Redirect that toward that which is true and good and authentic. And maybe you look at the world and you see it's just all phony and there is no authenticity, and so you give up and you go back to the video game. But you can create something authentic, not by yourself, but as part of a system, as part of a community, as part of a larger organism. So look to be receptive to those people who are asking you to join a community, to be real, to be authentic, and to understand no one here is perfect. And in comparison with our ideals, there is the ideals remain the same, and that's maybe tragic. It also gives us hope, the idea that there is a constancy to these ideals. But the ideas have pretty much remained static. I mean, think about something like being celibate or being continent. To have continence, to be in control of oneself, that was just like the majority of people had that. And now we don't in so many different ways. And so we have fallen so far. And so there's something very discouraging about that. And there's a hopelessness about that. And there does need to be some kind of self-forgiveness. If you are purely a perfectionist, then it just becomes something like a Madonna horror complex. It becomes, it's like, well, if I can't be perfect, then I'm going to be evil. Sometimes you see this with stories of priests and things of that nature. This all or nothing mentality. But it was really more important than where you're at is what is your direction? What is the trajectory you're heading in? What is the proverb of Confucius that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and it continues each step with a single step. So what matters is the trajectory and the ability and the willingness to jump back on the horse, even as you fall off the horse, and things may seem worse than ever before, and things, in a sense, for a lot of people, they have to learn through experience. You can't abstractly teach people, especially moral lessons, when society is telling you one thing. It is very hard to go against the grain and well, I'm going to reject everything society says and come up with my own morality. Well, that's very difficult, and what ends up happening is that people can't really follow through with that, and it's very hard to maintain. You get a lot of hypocrites. But just the trajectory is important. It's important to get back on the horse and to continue pushing in that direction. As long as you are alive, there is always hope. I mean, what does the image of Gollum tell us? Gollum is this irredeemable, disgusting creature, completely unsympathetic. You should just kill him. But Gollum, even though he does slide back into his evil ways, his desire to do good and his push to do good and that seed within him, it was just enough, right? So every little bit helps. It's like the homeless guy standing on the corner. Of course, in his case, he's probably a drug addict, and you give him $20 and he spends that on drugs. And you offer him a job and he says, I don't want a job, I'm a panhandler, I make more out here than I'd ever make working in your stinky little factory. So, of course, that's maybe a bad example. But, there is the sign, the cardboard sign. Every dollar helps. Every little bit helps, which is true. Every little bit does help. Every little bit does help. In the scheme of things, again, if we're looking at trajectory, if we're conceiving of the afterlife as a manifestation in some ways or a continuation of trends, then if you're on a downward spiral, you need to do everything you can to slow that spiral, to arrest that spiral, to try to climb out of that spiral, to seek people who are bigger and stronger than you, who can help you out of that spiral. Whether those are mentors, whether those are mythologies, whether those are gods, whether those, whoever those people are, your ancestors, your ideals, whoever those people are, reach out to those people. Those people are there. I mean, everybody has them, everybody has them, right? And I think sometimes people dismiss it as silly or childish, or, it is a coping mechanism. Apathy exists to protect us from harm. It exists to protect us from emotional pain. We don't want to feel pain, so we become apathetic. But, pain is part of the goal of life. If you are not encountering pain, you are not growing. If you are not growing, you are dying. So if you are not living, you are dying. And that is a joke people tell. Oh, well, I'm dying. I'm dying. In 80 years, I'm going to die. I'm in the process of dying. Yeah, there is something to that. We are either growing or we are dying. We are living or we are dying. Every day, every action that we take is contributing toward our life and our growth, or it's contributing to our death and to our decay. So, no matter how bad things are, because I do talk to people, and I do talk to a lot of people, and some people who are doing very well, and who have they're really well put together, and they really have a plan of action, and they're very disciplined, and it's awesome. Those people are inspiring, and they are good to talk to. And then you talk to other people, and people who don't have it together, and people who are really suffering, people who are really struggling in many different ways. I mean, and we can point out commonalities between all of the different struggles that people have, but they come in many different packages, some that are visible, some that are hidden, and you don't know. Everybody has their own struggle. I mean, the best of us and the worst of us. And at the end of the day, there is a level of perfectionism and defeatism which says, oh, well, I will never be a good person, or I will never be good enough, or something like this. Therefore, why bother? Why bother? I should just give in to the forces of death and defeat and sin and things of that nature, and I should just give up. Well, no, that's not true. Because if we do understand that at the moment of our death, it is not, the slate is not wiped clean. I think that is what a lot of people would want to think. But Christianity and Hinduism and other religions, they, Norse paganism, Greek paganism, they do not say, oh, when you die, the slate is wiped clean. And that is the end of it all. And you don't have to worry about what happens after you die. No. Always, again and again, in all of these cultures, all of these myths, what you do in your life impacts the place you're going to next. And so, no matter how bad things are, they can always get worse. And you should be trying to, improve it. And I think if you're starting out at rock bottom or in the worst place, and you even get an inch toward the good, and you repeat that through 1,000 lifetimes, then you're going toward the good. Whereas if you say, well, things are bad, things are, pretty much as bad as they could be, so I'm not going to try, and then you're going to continue in that downward spiral, and that's very hard to get out of. So these are things to think about. These are things to contemplate. These are things that I contemplate as I speak them. I speak them, I say them as affirmations, as a kind of self mantra, as a kind of prayer. When you say, God, let us be good, let us be faithful, let us be humble, let us be charitable, let us be generous, let us be hardworking. Let us be kind to one another. Let us be empathetic. Let us be caring. Let us be passionate. You pray to God. You pray to God that He gives you the strength to change, to break out of the prisons and the shackles that keep you down and to keep you in a low place and to keep you from reaching your potential and doing things that you were really meant to do. You pray to God to do that, and I guess there are different ideas about prayer. Some people think that, oh, well, God's just going to do whatever he does, so prayer is useless, and why should you bother praying? If you pray for $1 million and you don't get it, then there is no use in praying for the $1 million, and if you do pray for it and you do get it, well, what is that? Does that mean that you changed God's mind? And so there are these very superficial arguments. Well, prayer really has nothing to do with any of those like logical fallacies, Epicurean arguments about God. And, can you change the mind of God? If he can change his mind, then he's not perfect. And if he can't change his mind, then, then what's prayer? And all of that, put that aside for a moment. Understand that prayer is really about yourself. Prayer is really about harmonizing your divine nature with your instantiated nature, bringing yourself closer to that divine nature it's really an internal dialogue. You're saying, God, help me be this way. And you are, the linguistics there and the semantics there, maybe we should unpack that in a way that I'm not going to do today, but you're not asking God to change himself to be more like you. You were asking for yourself to be changed to be more like God. That is what you were asking for when you pray. You're never asking for a change in God. God, I know you said this was the 10th commandment, but can you please change that? I'm praying, I'm begging you. That's not what prayer is about. Prayer is about, God, I know what you want. I know what your plan for me is. I know what things are supposed to be like, and I'm not living up to that, and I'm not doing that. So I'm gonna pray that you give me the power, that you help me, that you aid me in becoming more like you and toward following the path that you've set out for me. So that is what prayer is about, and you can kind of adjust the way that I'm talking about prayer for a polytheistic perspective or a monotheistic perspective. So there's a lot of different ways you can talk about it, but that I think that is one way that we should think about the Mr. Cool Mog podcast going forward. It is a prayer. It is a prayer for what we want in the world, how we want ourselves to be, we'll still have, we'll talk about sports, and we'll still have some good times, some funny times. But we do occasionally need to hit that reset button and just get back to basics and what it's all about. So I've tried to end the podcast before, but I've got to end it now. Thanks for listening, and I will be with you next time. Bye-bye.